In this session, we will meet Derek Lee, who is another familiar face at our conference. At Microsoft, Derek Lee is a program manager for Azure Logic Apps, and he has a strong focus on user experience. A warm welcome to you, Derek.
All right, thank you. Hello everyone. How is everyone doing? Can you hear me all right? Remember to unmute the video player if you haven't already. That's the mistake I made, and I was wondering why Valerie was just talking and no sound. And do let me know in the chat window if you can hear me all right, if you are experiencing any problems. I want to let you know that I live kind of in the middle of nowhere, so my internet isn't the best. We'll see how this works. Please let me know and let Mohan know, our moderator, if you see any problems. I can try to disable my webcam if that helps. Worst case, we do have a backup recording that we can play for this session, but hopefully we don't have to go there. So again, thank you for joining me remotely this session of the Integrate 2020 conference. And today, I want to talk to you about developing Logic Apps. Now, just like John mentioned at the keynote, this is really our favorite conference of the year. We really like to meet all of you and present new content. And just like all the previous talks that have given at Integrate, everything you see and hear today in this session will be brand new, that has never been shown before. So I hope you will like the content, and let's get started. And I'm going to start by immediately contradict myself and say that there is a lot more to developing Logic Apps than just writing the Logic app. There has been countless videos recorded and blogs written about how to do a particular thing with Logic App. Many produced by those of you who are watching me right now. Exception handling, asynchronous calls, so on and so forth. You can also find me in a lot of those videos and blog posts. But that's not what I want to talk about today. So what else is there when we think about developing Logic App if it's more than just writing the Logic App? When we think about companies and enterprises adopting Logic App, I think there is a lot more than just what can Logic App do that has to go into the decision. There's the consideration of the ability on governance. There is the desire to do DevOps and have that to fit into the existing models that they are already doing using other Azure products. There is the consideration of, can we leverage the power of automation? And there's a lot more, but these are the three things I want to focus on today. So let's start with governance, and we'll talk about governance in the context of Azure policy. And a few things comes to mind when we talk about governance. So let's take a look at a few examples today. Now, you may want to mark the workflows to be audited if certain criteria are met. The simple example can be, well, if it uses a connector, and that's the example we'll look at in the demo. But of course, you can customize this to fit your exact requirements. Maybe you want to audit a Logic App when and if it uses an enterprise connector. You may want to block certain connector usage. With Logic App, we support more than 300 different connectors. But you may not want your developers to use, say, Facebook or Twitter in your company's Azure subscription without any special approval. Similarly, you may want to go even one step further and only allow a small set of pre-approved whitelisted connectors to be used when people building workflows. You may want to put restrictions on the connection level so that you only allow the use of pre-created connections with a set of defined credentials and block any new ones from being created. And finally, there is data loss prevention. You may want to allow developers to use either OneDrive or Dropbox in the workflow, but block the two from being used in the same workflow. therefore preventing the possibility of a data breach and unintended movement of sensitive data from one place to the other. So let's take a look at a few examples. Now, the first one is very simple. We just want to mark any workflow that uses a connector to be audited. We know that for a workflow to use connectors, there must be a $ connection object as part of the resource definition. Therefore, we can use that as the indicator when creating the Azure policy. So here you can see a simple JSON document representing the Azure policy. And we're saying the policy rule is if the field of Microsoft.logic/workflow/parameters contains a key called $ connections, then take an effect of marking it for audit. It's really as simple as that. The next thing I want to show you is to block certain connector from being used in a workflow. And we'll use Instagram for this example. We'll look at the same object, Microsoft.logic/workflows/parameters. And we'll first cast it to a string and then do a comparison and search whether the word Instagram appears in this value. And if so, then we're gonna take the effect rather than mark it for audit. We're just gonna straight on deny such operation. Now, if you're careful, you will see the angular brackets and the string casting. And you're right, those are Azure Resource Manager deployment template functions that I've used here. And you can use almost all Azure Resource deployment template functions when you author your Azure policy, which is a really powerful tool. So in this case, you can create a connection to Instagram, all right, within the Logic App Designer, but you won't be able to save the Logic App because of this particular policy. Let's take a look at an alternative way to achieve the same goal. So in this case, rather than looking at the workflow definition at save time, I'm actually gonna be keeping an eye on the API connection resource. So I'm saying my policy rule is if the resource operation has a field called Microsoft.web/connections/API ID, and if it ends with managed APIs/Instagram, I'm gonna deny it. So here, you won't even be able to create a connection to Instagram, let alone save the workflow that uses the Instagram connector. All right, and lastly, an example on data loss prevention. I'm gonna use here OneDrive and Dropbox, for example. So I'm saying the policy rule is if both of these conditions are met, if you are using OneDrive and you are using Dropbox, I'm gonna deny it. Therefore, we prevent the two connectors from being used at the same time within the same workflow. One thing to keep in mind is that there is about a 15 minutes-ish delay after the policy definition is created or updated and before the scan can complete and the start of the enforcement period opens. Which is a segue into my demo. Because of such delay, I have pre-created all the policies that I will be showing you, but I will show you what goes into this policy, and I will show you the enforcement of this policy. So let's switch to the browser. And so here you can see I have 3 policies that I have already created in my subscription. Let's just take a look at them one by one. The first is to audit a workflow with any API connection. So again, the policy rule, this is the part that you should be paying attention. And I'm saying if this Microsoft.logic/workflow/parameters contains a key of $ connection, I'm gonna audit it. Let's go back to the list. So this is the data loss prevention policy. I'm doing a little bit different here. I'm saying rather than OneDrive and Dropbox, I'm doing Twitter and Service Bus. Same idea. If the two exist in the same Logic app, we will block it. And the last one, I'm using the connection approach to block the creation of any connections into Instagram. So we'll see that working very shortly. The next screen I want to show you is the compliance page. So after you have created your policy, what we have here is a report of whether it is compliant or not. So we can see that I don't have any workflow that uses Instagram connection. I don't have any workflow that contains Twitter and Service Bus, but it looks like I have 3 workflows in the scope of my policy assignment, and 2 of them are using some sort of connectors in them. So you can even go into the resource and review them and approve or deny them based on your review. All right, so that's the policy side of the things. Let me show you how this works. So we'll start here. So here I have a Logic app. Let's start, I think, with a recurrence trigger and some Twitter action just to get a user profile. Now remember, our data loss prevention policy calls out that you cannot use Twitter and Service Bus in the same Logic app. Right, so I'm gonna try to add an action. I'm gonna select Service Bus. We're just gonna use send message for this example. I already have a connection created, so I'm just gonna use that one. And let's just send something to the test queue. So, all right, let's try to save the Logic app, and the Logic app will fail to save. And if we read the error message here, we can see that well, the operation is disallowed by the policy, and the policy name is block certain connectors in the same workflow. So there you go. All right, so let's remove the Service Bus action. And the next thing I can show you is to block Instagram from being used at all. So I'm gonna try to use an Instagram action. Again, I'm just gonna do get my profile. So I don't have any Instagram connection so far. So I'm just gonna sign in, and this is gonna fail immediately. So again, let's parse the error message that is shown here. So it's a fail to create the connection. Okay, the resource Instagram is disallowed by the policy with the name block Instagram connection creation. There we go. We just look at that policy and we know that it is working now. Okay, cool. So that is that. If you're paying attention, you may be wondering if I go back to the policy definition page. So you see here, I have this property called field, and I'm referencing this value. You may be wondering where this value is coming from. So let me show that to you really quick. There are 2 easy ways that you can get this value. The first way is by using Azure Resource Graph Explorer. So here I have a query. Let me rerun that query. Just list all the resources under my Integrate 2020 demo resource group. So you can see I have a bunch of resources here. And all you need to do is to do a project aliases. We'll rerun the query. So you get a different set of results, still 1 row per resource. We're gonna take a look at the workflow one. So we'll use this one, for example. So you can see all the root level objects for aliases. These are the value you can use when creating the Azure policy. So if I scroll down, I will be able to show you the workflow parameters somewhere. So this one doesn't have it. Let's go to a different one. There we go. So Microsoft Logic /workflows/parameters. So this is the value that you can use in the field property when authoring your policies. All right, cool. There is another way. So let me show that to you really quick. Azure Policy does have a VS Code extension that you can install. The experience is very similar to almost all other Azure resource extensions that you can browse to a particular resource from this tree view, right? So you select your subscription, your resource group, and then the resource. So here I'm just picking a random Logic app that I have in my subscription, and you can see the resource definition is shown up here. So I can try to locate this parameter object again. And when I hover, it is showing me the value for its alias. So Microsoft.logic/workflow/parameters. Again, we get the same value, and that's what you can use for your policy authoring. Cool. So that is governance. Next, let's talk about DevOps. And I want to talk about it in the context of workflow running on function runtime. Both John and Matt have talked about workflow running on function runtime that we're shipping to private preview now. And it has a lot of advantages. It is performance, especially when we're talking about the stateless version, when we don't have to preserve the inputs and outputs, we can run your workflow super fast. It is portable. You can run it locally. You can run it in an Azure app service with function runtime. You can run it in a Docker container. You can even run it inside a Kubernetes cluster. But what I want to focus in my session is the DevOps aspect for it. So what do I mean that it has a better DevOps experience? Well, there are a couple of things. Source control, obviously. We need source control to do any sort of DevOps. But there is more. When we think about DevOps, we want to be able to leverage a modern CI/CD pipeline, such as Azure DevOps or GitHub Action. Then we have the desire to define infrastructure as code, so we can truly capture everything that is needed for our solution to operate at the most optimum state. So let's take a look at a simple process as a developer may go through developing against such a project. So imagine we already have some workflow project created and it is up and running, but we want to make some changes. So a simple process may look like this. I start by cloning the source repository on GitHub. Once I have that locally, I will make edit and test it locally using VS Code, both of which Matt have shown you in the previous sessions. From there, I want to push my change to GitHub remote, and that's it. That's it for me as a developer. And from that point on, I want the automated CI/CD process to take over. I hope GitHub Action can automatically build and deploy the latest bits to Azure. And ideally, I also want GitHub Action to automatically build it into a Docker image and publish it to Docker Hub. So I can then take it from Docker Hub and deploy it to my on-prem Kubernetes cluster if so needed. So let's take a look at how this may work. Quick demo time. There are a couple of things I want to show you. Let's start with the workflow app. So here I have a workflow app already created inside Azure. I have one workflow in it. Let me just show you the content of this workflow really quick. So again, super simple one, request, and we are doing a response of hello world, okay? So that's that, keep that in mind, and let's take a look at GitHub. So GitHub, this is where my source control lives. I have a repository called Logic Apps CI/CD, and you can see the request response is here, here is my Docker Hub. Let me just refresh and show you this is indeed the latest. So I don't have anything in my Docker Hub repository. Well, actually I do. So let me delete that. So you know that this is a live demo that's working. So I don't have any text in this directly /workflow app repository. All right, cool. So that's that. Now let me show you what I have in VS Code. In VS Code, I have already cloned that GitHub repository. So I have it locally. Let me just walk you through the folder structure here. So here I have a GitHub /workflows folder. This is the GitHub action definition in YAML format. I have two definitions. The first is to deploy the project to Azure. So I'm saying, oh, this is the name of my workflow app when it is up in Azure, because this is a C# backed project. I'm defining the .NET version. I'm doing a few things. I'm checking out the GitHub action repository so I can execute my actions, setting up environments, and then I'm building my project using .NET Build. And lastly, I'm publishing that with zip deploy. So that is taking what I have in my GitHub repository and push that to Azure. And then I have another one called Docker image.yaml. This is much simpler. Really what we're doing is we're using this Docker/build and push action to use the Docker file I have in my repository to say, let's build this into a Docker image and publish it to my Docker Hub repository. And all the username and password are saved in my GitHub configuration, so you don't see it here. You see the workflow.json. This is the request response that I just showed you inside Azure portal. So let's do this. Let's change this a little bit. Let's say, change this to hello integrate 2020. I'm not going to use the designer because Matt have already shown you that. And let me go to GitHub desktop. So I'm just going to commit that to my master and push it to the origin. All right, so now what have we covered? So we say, as a developer, I have cloned the repository. I have it running locally. I can make changes. I can test it, and now I'm comfortable with the change. And I can push it to the remote. All right, so let's switch back to the browser. And if I were to refresh the GitHub page, we should see a new commit just a few seconds ago. And if I go to GitHub Actions, there should be 2 GitHub actions that are running because my latest commit. So let's take a look at the Docker one first. This one usually finish the soonest. Looks like it's already completed. So I just want to show you the logs really quick. So here you can see that I think this is the interesting one. We're executing this build and push action. We log into Docker Hub repository. The login was successful. We're resolving all the dependencies. And at the end, we're pushing that to my remote. So that is this action executed. Let me show you the Docker Hub. So now if I were to refresh, we should have the latest version of my workflow project built as a Docker container available in my Docker Hub repository. This was updated just a minute ago by me. Okay. Let me switch back to GitHub Action and show you the second one. The second one usually runs a little bit longer, 2-3 minutes-ish, because of, well, it's a C# project and there are a lot of dependencies to resolve. So, oh, this actually, yeah, it's almost complete. So we can see the build was successful. There were 2 warnings because some version mismatch. Didn't get the time to fix it. But once the build is completed, it's going to publish that to Azure. So that should complete fairly quickly. So you can see that we're using the new zip deploy method to deploy to app service. And it is successfully deployed. Cool. So to show you this is really working, let me switch back to the workflow app that I showed you initially. This will take a second. I think the underlying app service has to restart after the deployment. So we'll just give it a few seconds. And I'm just gonna show it in the designer, and it is updated. So again, if you think about the full experience as a developer, all that I've done is, well, I checked it out, I edited it offline, I pushed it to my GitHub remote, and that is it. I don't have to worry about the deployment. I don't have to worry about running some ARM templates. So that is the demo for DevOps for workflow running on function runtime. Looks like the internet isn't doing very well. People are reporting some blurry images. So let me stop my webcam. I think you have seen enough of me. So hopefully that will save some bandwidth for me sharing my screen. All right, so that is the second demo I want to show you. And the next thing that I want to talk about is automation, and in particularly using Logic Apps to automate tasks for other Azure resources. When I think about workflows, Logic Apps, I think about the scenario largely divided into two categories: using Logic Apps for integration and using Logic Apps for automation. Now, the name of the Integrate conference kind of implies that many of you here today are probably more focused on the integration side of the scenarios. But I do want to spend some time to show you what we are working on to better support automation scenarios. And maybe some will even benefit your work. So what do we want to automate? Well, there are many things when we think about other Azure resources and what automation do we want to enable. Maybe I want to auto start and stop my VMs, turn it on at the beginning of the day and turn it off at the end of the day to save cost. If I have a blob storage, maybe I want to automatically purge the old blobs that are older than certain days that I don't care about. Maybe I want to send some notifications, be it email or Teams notification, when a resource state changes, when it is updated or deleted. I would like to tag resources with the time it was created and whom created it. And lastly, it would be great if I can get some monthly email sent to me for the cost of running a particular resource. And really, you name it. I think there are countless scenarios on when you want to automate things. And we think Logic App can be a great solution for it. So how? How do we plan to enable this experience? Well, the experience automation tasks, as we are tentatively calling it, will be built right into each and every single Azure resources to help with the discoverability. We want to flatten the learning curve as much as possible so you don't have to be a Logic expert to use it. We want to provide out-of-box templates to get you started and also open source these templates so you can learn from it and also possibly contribute so the list of templates would grow. And of course, we want to provide ways for you to graduate from tasks into proper Logic Apps once you have learned the power of a Logic App. And with that said, let's do a quick demo. So here I am inside an integration account. So here you can see in the table of content, I have this new entry called automation task. I'm going to click add. The first screen that is presented to me is a choice of templates that I can choose from. Again, this is a very early prototype of what we are building. And we are going to choose the first one, which is send me a monthly cost for the resource that I care about. The next thing is I have to provide the necessary credentials for the automation task to be able to execute. So here I have two examples. I have the Azure Resource Manager that is needed to talk to the billing API to be able to get the cost. And I have Office 365 Outlook to send the email. So both of which I have already provided the connection. So I'm just gonna go to the next screen. And this is the important bit. This is the configuration of the task. And you can see it only asked me for two things, the name of the task and where to send that email to. Now, the underlying logic app we're creating for you actually consists of many different actions, but we want to simplify it. And again, going back to the idea of flatten the learning curve, making it as easy as possible. We're only surfacing the bare minimum information that is needed to get you started. So I'm gonna just send this email to myself, and I will click create. And that's it. That's all that I need to do in order to create an automation tasks. So the task should execute very quickly, and I can show you the email shortly. But while it is running, let me just show you. So here I can go back and change my credentials, for example. I can change where I want to send that email to. I can view the runs. So here you can see we just had a successful run. And you can see this is actually the logic that's behind the scene, but we hide all that complexity for you. And if I were to switch to my email client, I can show you the email that I just got. So the monthly cost for this resource is about $100 US. And let me go back to automation task. The last thing I want to show you is that we do have the option for you to go from the task to the actual logic app, and you will be able to clone it and make this your own and make it even more powerful by adding additional actions and logic into this logic app. So that is automation task. We do want your feedback on it, so feel free to leave your comments and feedback and thoughts in the chat window, just to your right. We want to know, would you use it? Would you recommend it to other people? Does the name automation task make sense? Do you think it should be called something else? And if so, do let me know from the chat window again, what do you think will be a better name? And what template would you like to see? Right, so I talked about VM auto start stop. I talked about auto purge blob. I showed you the monthly cost email, but is there anything in particular that you find yourself doing a lot that you would like to see a template being made available? Please do let us know. And anything else? There is one more thing I want to mention really quick, just in the context of automation, which is parameters. Now, you may be wondering how we made it possible to surface only those parameters that is required to you when you first created the workflow or the tasks. It is actually done so by using the parameter feature we shipped a few months ago. So here you can see the email ID, which we need from you is being authored as a parameter, a workflow parameter, so that the automation experience knows to pick that up and show it to you. So that is automation. And there is one more thing. There is one more thing I want to talk about. I want to prefix this with that this is very, very early design explorations. But I want to share with you, especially this audience at Integrate. I want to see if you would like to see this. I want to see what your thought on it, whether you think this will help you and with your daily work interacting with Logic Apps. But also just to let you know what we are thinking about and what we are working on. Again, very early design explorations, but here we go. So we are looking at re-ramping and doing a refresh of the Logic App Designer. We have heard your feedback that the Logic App has been out there and become generally available for more than 3 years at this point, and you are becoming more and more familiar with Logic Apps. You're using it for ever so complex scenarios, and you have 10, 20, even 50 some actions in your workflow, and it's hard sometimes to use the designer to interact with those workflows. So we want to make the designer better. I know that's where you spend most of your time working with Logic Apps. So here is a design exploration to make things more compact and to show you more relevant information on the screen. Right, so you see the cards are smaller. We are indicating the condition true and false branch a little bit differently visually. The run after looks different. The scope looks a little bit different. But overall, you just see more things and have a better overall picture of what this workflow is doing. On the top right corner, you can also see that we're exploring the idea of a mini map. So you can see even when you zoomed in, you know where you are in the bigger workflows. We're exploring ideas of how we can support you to make more complex workflows, complex split and joins and different sort of parallel branches. We're also keeping in mind that you, our users, are building more and more complex workflows. And we want to make it, we want to make sure that whatever design that we come up with can support these complex workflows. Even if you have many parallel branches, we want to make sure that we can render it in a much better way compared to what it is now. And lastly, we're exploring the idea of showing things inside a panel. So there are a couple of benefits with this approach. When we render the action in a panel, we have the full height of your screen, so we can show more parameters for you to edit. We can have the token experience built right into it. And we're also separating the responsibility of the canvas and the panel. Right? The canvas is for you to browse and make sense of what that workflow is doing. And the panel is for making edits. And lastly, we are exploring ideas of better supporting drag and drop. We want to make sure that you know what you can drag. We want to show you the gripper. We also want to make it obvious where can you drop it to. So we have different kind of drop zone visualized for you. So you don't have to guess whether you can drop the action to a particular place or not. And with that said, this will conclude the presentation side of the session. I hope you like what I've shown you. And let's switch to the Q&As. And I do have some live polls. So if you have a chance, I would appreciate if you can just take a look at the poll questions, and we'll just take you a few seconds. But let's take a look at the Q&As. Let's see.
Hi, Derek.
So
this is Mohan. You have 11 minutes to end this session, so you can take the questions from here.
Sounds good. Let's see if I can turn on my video so you can see me again, since we don't have to share the screens anymore. All right, so we have, the first question is, so basically we can create a Logic app and make it a task as well. This is a feedback that we have heard. The current thinking is, yes, it would go both ways, as in you can create a task, you can have it stay as task, but you can convert it into a Logic app and make it your own. But we also understand people want to have the ability to create tasks programmatically, maybe as part of their deployment. So yes, we will make sure that there is a way for you to create a Logic app, but mark it so that it become a task for a particular resource. So that's that. We have next question. Does the CI/CD scenario support Azure DevOps as a source code repository instead of GitHub and GitHub Actions? Yes, GitHub Action and Azure DevOps are the two, I think, most popular ones that you can use. We also have the corresponding actions inside DevOps as well. I didn't show it today just due to time constraint, but it is possible. Give it a try. If you have any questions, if you ran into any trouble, do let us know, and we are more than happy to help you with it. All right, next question, can automation be implemented to start-stop logic app at a specific timing? Yes, we don't have the template created for this particular scenario, obviously, but there's nothing that would stop us from creating such template. And once we made the template open sourced, you, our customers, will also be able to create any templates that you find to be useful, and create a pull request, we'll review, and we'll make it available to everyone to use. Next question. How is automation on Logic Apps different from Azure Automation product? Would not this be confusing to the customers? Yes, this is a concern that we will have to figure out before we release this to public preview. I think naming is part of this. And we have heard feedback, it sounds like this as well, being the reference of the word automation may cause more confusions. So we'll definitely look into that and see if we can have better naming and better communicate the difference between the two. Let's see, is there any limit on the number of logic apps that can be deployed in a function app? There's no hard limit really, but I'm just gonna reiterate the answer that would have been given if you ask people from the functions team on how many functions can I have in a function app. And the question would be something like, you can have as many as you want, but you really shouldn't. You should think about what they do and divide them into different function apps. Depends on their implementation, depends again their language, depends on their performance requirements, depending on their scaling requirements. So break them apart would be the better approach, and that would be my answer. Okay, next one, can policy help to track if a connection is no more needed, that is all logic app using a specific connection has removed? Maybe, I haven't tried this myself, but since you asked about this, I actually have a PowerShell script on our Logic Apps GitHub repository that will show you connection with no Logic App referencing it, so that it is safe to be deleted. So go to github.com/Azure/Logic Apps and go into the scripts subfolder, and you should be able to find a PowerShell script to help you solve that problem now. And we'll certainly look into making that into a template and whether that's possible or not. Okay, next one. How does connector work, i.e. on-prem FTP connector or a SaaS connection work interchangeably when deploying Logic App on function runtime locally and then move that to the cloud and vice versa? So when you use connections, I think Matt may have shown this in his demo. I can't recall super clearly. But when you first open the Logic App Designer inside VS Code, you will be prompted to choose a Azure subscription and resource group so that you can reference cloud connectors or API connectors. So even when you are developing locally, there will be some connectors that the VS Code extension and underlying runtime will talk to the cloud in order to perform that operation, right? Imagine if you have a SharePoint connector and you have SharePoint online, yes, you can run it locally, but we'll still have to talk to the SharePoint that's up on the cloud. So the same connection would be used both in your local version as well as after it is deployed to the cloud. So that's that. So same connection, just moved from local to Azure. Does Azure policy support regex? I don't think so. I'm not an expert in Azure policy. I know enough to do what I want to do, but I don't think so because regex, as you may know, has some inherent security issues when executing some untrusted regex code in a multi-tenant share environment. So I don't think so, but they support some very simple string matching, right? So you see that when checking for Instagram, I'm using likes star manage APIs / Instagram. So you can do postfix and prefix matching and things like that. Let's see, what else? What happened if a developer build the Logic Apps in VS locally, then deploy to Azure with these policies? So the policy, it's not part of your local Logic App project, right? So the local Logic App project only captures the workflow aspect of your implementation. So so depends on exactly what scenario we're talking about. Maybe if you have already the policy up there and running and the enforcement is happening and you have a local Logic App that violates such policy, the deployment may fail due to such policy violation. Or you may choose to have both the policy and the workflow to be deployed right next to each other, and then it depends on the sequence of such deployment. So how the policy work is, you can have a denied action, right? So we say, hey, you have an Instagram connector, I'm gonna deny it. But it could be that before I author such policy, I have already created an Instagram connection. So there is an option in the policy to say, retrospectively, go back to the existing ones and rescan them and take a mediation action. So you can have that as additional implementation in your Azure policy and decide what to do, right? So maybe you want to say, hey, I have to disable it even if you created before this policy starts, and I will mark it in a certain way and then notify the resource owner that I have taken such action. All right, I think I lost track where I am.
Derek, I think you have to look into the pending questions.
Okay, let's see. Let's take a look at the pending ones. Does Logic App policy have an impact on Power Automate? No. So policy, when you create a policy, you have to choose the scope for its enforcement. And actually, let me switch to the browser and see if I can show that to you. So one thing I didn't show you. So there are three aspects of the policy. There's the definition, there's the assignment, and there is the compliance report. So I showed you the definition, I showed you the compliance report. What I didn't show you is the assignment, right? So let's take a look at this assignment. So for this policy, I'm saying I only want to enforce it for this daily_integrate20_demo resource group, right? Anything outside of this resource group will not be impacted by this definition. And Power Automate, by the nature of it being outside of the Azure portal, will not be impacted by Azure policy at all. All right, let's see. The new designer in the making looks like following the designer path for Power Virtual Agent. Yes, yes and no. So what we realized, I guess a little bit background, is that we realized at Microsoft we have so many products that has the requirement to render a dependency graph. And everyone is doing it differently. So we are actually having a V team that brings all the teams together and trying to consolidate and land on a unified design language when showing the graph, which is why you see a lot of the design language from the Power side of things translates to what we are thinking about. And a lot of the exploration that we are doing will also eventually translate into their product as well.
Okay, directly at this point, the session is going to go off. People are going to off.
Sure. Okay, sounds like that's all the time we have. Again, thank you for joining me in this session. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do give us feedback, either in the chat or on Twitter. Just mention us. And hope you have a great day, and look forward chatting with you in all the different venues. Thank you very much, and take care.
Covey.co